Hello, kind people. This is Dmitry. Welcome to my weekly listener recap, and we're going to talk about this puzzle on your screen. It's called Ish. At least I think that's how you read it. And it's by Twin. Now, Twin is, of course, Colin Thomas, and I believe a lot of this video is going to, quite a significant chunk of it is going to be me talking about Twin rather than talking about the puzzle. The reason being that I actually solved this puzzle 2.5 weeks ago. It was published on the weekend of the listener dinner, so on the day of the listener dinner in the paper and the day before online. And it wasn't, they try not to put too hard puzzles. At least I think the editors try to make the not to put some Saber E-grade on the weekend of the dinner so that people don't end up talking about it at the dinner. And this is not the first time I think Twin is being published on this weekend when the dinner happens, even like since I started solving. And because it was quite some time ago, I'm not sure I will have very much to say about like individual clues, which of course would have been very fitting given how great a clue writer Twin is. And probably a significant chunk of this video will end up being me talking about Colin. And let's actually start with that. So Twin is, of course, yeah, as I said, Colin Thomas. One of, without sort of any shadow of the doubt, one of the best setters of recent years. Since I started solving 5 years ago, he managed to win Puzzle of the Year for the Listener, Puzzle of the Year for the Magpie. He became assistant crossword editor of the Times. He is now on the editorial team of the Magpie. And to top that all, he is now setting in the Observer as gemelo, which is apparently a Spanish word for twin. And of course, in the Observer, since 1930s, there were only 3 legendary setters. Torquemada, who more or less invented the whole genre, Ximenes, who is probably the most famous crossword setter in like the 20th century, and AZ, who has been setting for 50 years and is still carrying on in the Observer, but has now stepped away from the monthly clue writing competitions, and my understanding is that Colin is going to take them over, so he is now going to be the 4th, and he is already the 4th in this line of the Observer setters, which is absolutely remarkable. And all of that is completely deserved. And so Colin, I think, is one of the very few people who is more or less like full-time kind of employed in the world of crosswords. And this being the week when the candidates tournament is happening in chess, kind of obviously chess is a more popular pastime worldwide than crosswords, but even then, like, I guess it's still comparable. Like, there are not that many people who manage to, make a living out of chess. And like the top grandmasters, and maybe, you get like top couple of hundred and that's it. And then for the rest, it's just of us, it's just a very a hobby we're very passionate about. And it's not too dissimilar here, I guess. So Twin is, an absolute top setter. And maybe I should, well, as will become apparent from this puzzle, one of the things that Twin is very good at is, setting himself challenges that he then spectacularly overcomes as a setter. And so sometimes his puzzles are not even that difficult for the solver, but if the solver then tries to look at them from the setter's point of view, they then immediately realize just how amazing the construction is and how difficult it is to set anything like this. And usually when we talk about puzzles, when we talk about cryptics and this thematic cryptics, we realize that you either can have a very tricky grid constraints that make just the, say, beautifully symmetric grid very hard to achieve, or we can talk about clue constraints, and I guess, I mean, me not being a setter, I understand that there is certain balance between it. And so you can make one of them slightly easier at the expense of another. And Twin does not compromise here, and as we'll see, both clues and the grid is fairly constrained here. And nevertheless, he manages to write perfectly normally looking clues here. So let's have a look at this puzzle. A remarkably short preamble. And this is yet another thing that I think Colin likes. He likes the puzzle to kind of reveal its secrets as the solvers carry on, rather than writing long preambles outlining kind of what's going to happen. So if the preamble is short, that means that all the secrets that the puzzle might have are hidden within, and you kind of reveal them slowly as you go. So each clue needs a word removed to enable solving. The word's third letter spell and instruction solvers must follow. That's pretty much all the preamble, right? So the Chambers Dictionary is the primary reference. One answer is an abbreviation, so these usual things that typically occupy like the last line of a fairly long preamble here occupy, I think, about a half of it. Now, because I solved it quite some time ago, as I said, I am unlikely to, be very detailed in my in talking about individual clues. So I think I will move on straight to the end game, because this is one of the puzzles where the beauty comes from the appreciation of the construction. So once, and it wasn't very hard to solve, like, I don't know, maybe we can have a look at this clue, which is just basically an anagram of or boom a reads, and essential becomes an extra word. So this in pieces becomes a type of a woodwind instrument, specifically oboe. I'm not sure how to pronounce oboes d'amore. Apologies for, if there are musicians among you, I definitely mispronounced this. And so S becomes our first letter of the message, and then if you extract others, I did solve this on paper and I sent it off without taking a photo, so it was a little bit of a reconstruction from the photo of the grid, and I didn't have like the photo of the full thing. So so the extra message that you get, the message that you get from the extra third letters of the extra words is shade characters suggested by title and clue word lengths. And then you sort of, then comes the grid staring part of the process, which for some solvers might have been a fairly longish one, but I guess I was somewhat lucky. And one of the reasons I was lucky is that I think there were two puzzles in, either they were both in the Magpie, or maybe one was in the Listen and one was in the Magpie, that was around Pilish. Pilish being the idea of writing texts in such a way that the word lengths correspond to the digits in pi and in pi decimal expansion. And so when I looked at the clue word lengths and I started writing them, and I realized that this is 1, 4, 1, 5, I realized, and then the title is ish and has a word length of 3, I immediately realized that this is what's going, and that's actually only as far as I remember it. Or maybe not. Maybe I remember. What is it? Yeah, maybe I remember like 5 more. But so every single clue, like if you go from here all the way to the end, and I'm not sure that any of the solvers have checked that, but knowing listener solvers, I'm sure that, for example, the winner of Solver 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 this year did check this. And I hope it's correct. And knowing Colin, I know it's correct. And knowing the editors. But yeah, basically, it then comes not as a surprise that the characters that we need to highlight is P and I. And if you do highlight all the P's and I's in the grid, you realize that they appear in a pattern. And obviously another way of kind of arriving this is just noticing that like this string here is a rather suspicious sequence of a number of P's and I's. And of course, yet another way of getting to any of this was realizing that that it appeared on the 14th of March, which is a pi day, because in America they write it as 3/14. And so if we now highlight this thing, we would arrive at this, which is a popular approximation in rational numbers. So I believe this is what we highlight, and we submit this. So not hard at all for the solver, but for the setter, clearly there are grid constraints. You need to make sure that you put pi's and i's specifically here and nowhere else. And, you need to make it a symmetric grid of real words. Symmetry is something that Colin never ever compromises on. And obviously on the clue level, you then need to make sure that they all follow the prescribed pattern of lengths. And it's rather hard for me, not being a setter, to gauge like just how hard that is, but I guess it was not easy. So I think it's a very, very beautiful puzzle, and obviously we expect that from Twin. As with last year, where I was a little bit worried that the puzzle wasn't too hard to, compete for Puzzle of the Year, it looks like my worries were somewhat unfounded, because it came second, and again, deservedly so. So I don't know how the voting, is going to be come next March, but surely this will be somewhere there in the mix. So thank you for watching, and given that I'm recording it that late, I can make an announcement of the next two. So the next puzzle was a circular puzzle, which I'm usually not that big fan of, and this was no exception. So I might record a video on it, or I might skip it, depending on how it looks. But then the one after that was a one by Artix, which was one of the hardest listeners this year, and maybe even like in the last few years. Was definitely very, very, very tricky. So I am going to record a puzzle on that. That's going to be an interesting one, because again, there isn't all that much to say about it in the recap, but solving it took absolute ages. I mean, more than 3 days for me. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.